Athletes, take your mark. Get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blu Robinson here. Hope all of you are doing well. And I want to thank you all for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Greatly appreciate you doing so. Give us a review. Jump on there. It helps get this message out a little bit further and truly helps us make a bigger impact. And making that bigger impact, I want to turn your attention to our Patreon program. Our Patreon program allows you to pick a tier and invest into Team Addict to Athlete to help move this podcast forward. And I want to give a special thanks and shout out to all those who have been participating within our Patreon program. It really does help us get our message out further, and the income that we get also gives you something back through your donations through the Patreon program. Anything from bonus episodes, additional content, merchandise, exclusive deals and offers. You pick a tier that works best for you. And again, it's because of our Patreon subscribers that this podcast has definitely seen a jump and increase in our numbers and downloads. So I want to thank our super fans, Jerem Thurston, Holly Davies, Scott Foster and the Foster family, Coach Chris Williams, Brett Frew, Coach Tara Budson, Steve Riggs, Chelsea Olson, and the Warrior Within podcast and personal development by Sensei KP. Our rookie level subscribers, thank you so much. Kenny Roseman and Earl Dyer, you guys are very special to my heart. Our pro level subscribers, thank you. Gary Thurston and Josh Hansen. And of course, our championship level subscribers, thank you so much. Shad and Freya Robinson and the Robinson family, Tracy Whitby, and of course, Ron and Dee Loesch. If you would like to become a Patreon subscriber to help move this podcast forward and take advantage of our extracurricular recovery playbook that is currently being uploaded to Patreon, sometimes 1, 2, even 3 times a week at times, jump on patreon.com/addicttoathlete for more information. Athletes, coming at you a little bit late today. This podcast is being recorded a little bit late due to the significant impact that we felt on the team. And it's been more of an emotionally turbulent week as we have discovered the news and felt a very powerful impact that Team Addict to Athlete has suffered this week by the loss of a very dear friend and athlete, an amazing individual, Don Hutchings. The Hutchings family has been close to our program pretty much since the inception. In fact, I was going through some pictures and I saw Don's very first run he ever did with Team Addict to Athlete was our very first inaugural 5K in Highland, Utah. And he actually finished this 5K wearing Levi's and work boots. And I'm not sure what happened to him out there on that journey, but Don at that time, having come off of a pretty heavy addiction, decided to change his life. That run helped elevate him to a specific, frame of mind where he understood the erase and replace philosophy and began an amazing journey that lasted quite a while until here just several days here into December of 2021. When I received the news of the passing of Don and the Hutchings family who was reaching out and letting the people on the team and in the community know, I felt a great impact. And I'll be honest with you, it was so significant because of the nature by which this team operates. And listeners, the one thing about Team Addict to Athlete is that we are a family approach system, meaning we are not just individuals in recovery seeking health and wellness as an alternative method to sobriety, where we do so much community service, we do so much education, we do so much within the community through sports and athletic, that it really has been a huge impact because not only did Don participate, but his family did too. It's been really hard to watch the devastation that the families had to go through, understanding the emotions that have been felt and experienced since the loss of their father and our teammate. And if you are on Team Addict to Athlete, you have in fact bumped into Don and Russell, the micro machine, because Don and his son Russell put in hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of miles in the road race community where these individuals would run together. It was Don's son Russell that truly elevated him to understand the experiences that this team had to offer by running with his son. And early on the team, there was this bond that these two had, father and son, that I hadn't I hadn't expected to see on this team. And little Russell, I can't call him little anymore because over the years he's actually got quite tall. But wherever Don was, you'd see Russell there too. And wherever you saw Russell and Don, you'd see his wife Brooke. And wherever you saw his wife Brooke, you'd see his son Dakota. And everywhere you'd see his son Dakota, you'd see their daughter Colby. And these individuals, this family, not only reshaped what the community at large began to understand that a family in recovery could look like, but it also spilled over into the state of Utah running community. So significant was their impact in the service that they provided that this loss that we have on our team this last week has been more than I think a lot of us thought we could handle. And as we prepare to say our final goodbyes with the services that will be this coming week, I wanted to share a little bit about what this means, especially when we lose people that we truly love. And this inner world of grief that we sometimes feel as though we might have to face alone. There is so many emotions that I've been feeling this last week, and the outpouring of love from so many people that it's almost hard to comprehend how much relationships mean to someone in recovery. And when I started Addict to Athlete in 2011, I didn't realize how significant the running community would be and how much they would play into what I was creating for this new pathway to sobriety, that they would embrace these newcomers to the sport with such open arms. And what I mean by that is there are so many sports by which there are egos, and there are narcissism, and there is so many, pay to play type experiences that I was really kind of blown away by how the running community at large accepted Team Addict to Athlete and how much they accepted the athletes specifically. And that has been very apparent as I've been watching the reflections of remembrance on social media by seeing how many people truly fell in love with Don, with Russell, and with the family simply because they shared a trail or they shared the road with them. But it got me thinking about this term loss. And I don't believe that the people that pass away are truly lost. I believe that we know exactly where they are, but there is a loss and a void in our heart. Team Addict to Athlete, when we end our journey before we truly get to the destination, we call it taking a knee. But I also understand that there's significance behind understanding what happens when your race and your journey is over. But it's this situation and the loss of another athlete last month, and the many who had come before that have lost their battle to addiction, is greatly impacted the mechanism and the design of this team. Because when an athlete takes a knee, loses their battle, or do we say, becomes that free agent, it does leave a wound inside. And this specifically, as among others, has inflicted a wound so deep that the numbness and the pain from the void that's been left is very clear. And I believe that everyone experiences losses throughout our lives. We all know that. But as you know, the death of a loved one is typically unmatched for its emptiness and its profound sadness. We all feel that when we lose someone close to us. Our world stops, as you guys know. So much so that you'll know the exact time, the exact situation, the day, everything that loved one passes on. You'll even remember the exact moment that you found out or were told that a friend or family member had passed. And it's marked in your mind, and that when the world takes on a new kind of slowness, and it becomes very surreal, and it seems strange when the clocks in the world continues to turn and to spin, when our inner clock almost feels like it doesn't. But our life does continue, listeners. It really does. And we're really not even sure why or how, right? The difference, I think, is that life appears before us in so many different ways. It appears to us through the lenses of our experiences, about the connections that we make, the relationships that we build, the things that we learn, the things that we love. And when those things that we do with someone that loses their battle or unfortunately passes on aren't done together, it truly can make things very challenging for us. No one can give you words to make these kind of situations feel better, because I really don't think there are any. But I know that we will survive. Although we may not look or understand or even really know how, we will move on. But your loss and the grief that accompanies it are very personal to each person, and it differs from one person to another. Some may share the experiences of the people that they've lost, while others may hold that close to them and not share too many, memories or situations or feelings. They may try to console you in only a way that you'll know, but your loss kind of stands alone in its meaning to you and in its painful uniqueness. And I truly believe that, because there's so many roles that are played within our lives, from spouse to parent to child to family member to friend. We know that the loved ones who pass on in any way, shape, or form will always hold a special place in our heart. One person's passing touches so many people in so many different ways that everyone feels that universal loss, but we all feel it individually. Our task, I think, in our own mourning, in our own grieving, is to fully recognize the person that we'll miss, and to truly, I think, as Team Addict Athlete has brought to the consciousness of running in the running community, is to become a proxy runner for that individual. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in paying the respects to the people that we love who've passed on, and taking time to truly feel the magnitude of the relationship, and to do it sober, at the same time consoling the ones that are still here, truly bring the integrity of this life, I think, to the front of so many different conversations. That deep sense of loss is ours, and we choose how long we stay here. Now, there are some attributes that I've noticed that accompany some of these kind of situations, and I want to touch base on them, because there's so many feelings that are associated with grief when we lose someone to suicide or to overdose or to accident or to old age or to illness. And I really think there's value in understanding where some of these feelings reside in our hearts, in our minds, and the way that we reflect them to the people that are still here. These feelings are strange and sometimes unexpected, and there are so many variations of emotions that we'll feel and that we'll experience, that I think the task at hand is to truly, I would believe, is to truly embrace them. Now, by saying that, what I mean is that there will be times when you will experience an emotion of regret, because when a loved one dies, we often are left with so many regrets about the things that we wish we would have said, all the things we wish we would have done. We may regret what we didn't do, what we didn't say, so on and so forth. You know this. You've all had these experiences. Many of you have, I should say. We keep going back over the things that we wish we had said and the things that we wish we hadn't. And that's a hard one to wrap our hearts around. Because we got to remember, listeners, we are human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have the I wish I could have, I wish I should have. Regrets are hard to process. And there are very few people who can say that they don't have even the smallest of regret, even if things leave on a good level plane. Regrets are part of loss, and you are not alone in experiencing feelings of regret. Life is usually shorter than we'd hoped. I know that to be true in a lot of different ways, and we are often unprepared for any loss, even when we have a window of knowledge that it's coming. So it's really natural to be able to feel that things that we wanted, expected, or desired are going to feel unfinished, listeners. We often don't have enough time to comply or really to follow through or to completely do all the things that we'd hoped to. And very few people that I've run into through the process of grief truly feel like they got to do all they wanted to with the time that they had, much less be able to do it well. And I want you to think about that for a minute. Because we'll always have a dream that's been unfulfilled. We'll always have a wish that hadn't been granted. And chances are, no matter how much you did for your loved one, how much you cared for them, how much you loved them, there'll always be something else that you believe, you think, or that maybe even you could have done. But think about the more that we long for and crave is always there and will always be changing. So, listeners, if you do it, whatever it may be for you, something else is going to take its place. I need you to understand that regrets are often dreams that have gone unanswered. And it's super important to remember that even the smallest of things can be remembered as increments of love. So no matter what choices have been made, since the outcome of the loss has now been recognized, you may regret not choosing whether, the option was or wasn't there to experience one more fill in the blank. But listeners, that's not what it's about. It's about doing your best to make peace with any regrets that may bubble up. And to remember that it would be unrealistic to have done everything in life. It would also be very unrealistic to have been maybe even perfect and to have no regrets. So I'm asking you to forgive yourself if you find yourself in that kind of situation. It isn't true that if you could have made better choices or been in better situations that you wouldn't have done so. You did the best you could. You did the best you could for the time that you had in life. I know that sometimes grief can hold healing back and not allow the loss to fully be recognized by an individual. And if you have the courage to follow your feelings to the origin, to the core of them, you may be able to find some relief from that grief. But as you know, they may go deeper than even the feelings that surface, because regret, I believe, is part of grief. And we have to embrace it to its point. But if you follow the thread all the way back to its core, you may find a sense of wrongness that may have been with you, maybe even your whole life. And this grief may really provide an opportunity for you to create even a greater sense of healing. And I truly believe that. In terms of regret around your loved one who's passed away, if there are things that you wish you'd have said, I want you to know that you can still say them. You can still say them in your heart. You can still say them to your loved one. And it's never too late to say you're sorry, to forgive yourself, to forgive me, to forgive them. A simple "I love you" and "I thank you" will truly suffice. One thing I've noticed too about emotions beyond regret that typically are suppressed are simply qualified as tears. And tears are often one of the many ways we release our sadness. It's one of the many ways that our emotions and our built-in healing mechanisms allow ourselves to show emotional vulnerability. And unfortunately, too often we try to stop the necessary primal release of our emotions through tears. And I think in grief, we often have, maybe two main thoughts about weeping and crying. And the first is that overwhelming thought that sadness is going to never end, And the second is, will I stop crying because of that sadness? Many people begin to cry when they feel these kind of deep emotions, and there's nothing weak about that, men, gentlemen. And I want you to understand that it's a significant aspect of us being human. And at times you may start to cry, for no reason at all. It could be weeks, months, even years after. Allow it to happen. It may seriously come out of the blue, and you won't know the source of the cause, but allow it to come. Those unexpected tears remind you that the loss that you've experienced has only been experienced because you love. You have the capacity to love, and it hurts. I think people often find that they are reminded so unexpectedly of a loved one who's passed away when they start crying, and they feel like they're not prepared to handle it. But I do believe that you are. And by not suppressing your emotions, not trying to hide it from people, and allowing yourself to truly embrace the feeling, and weeping is one of the most human things we can do. And I think there's nothing you can do except collect yourself as best you can and really allow yourself the full measure of what that feels like by allowing those tears to symbolize your life, right? It really is part of you. It's part of how you feel. And it does represent the pain that resides inside, and that emotional, pursuit of process and of cause and effect can totally be symbolized through allowing those tears to come. And the truth is that tears are a symbol of life, and they should be trusted. Long periods of crying and allowing yourself to feel the measure of the emotion that you're experiencing will actually strengthen your healing process. I truly believe that. In this process of loss and of grief, there will be times when you'll absolutely have dreams of the person that has passed away. And dreams are also a very natural part of the healing process, and that part of sleep. And it truly embodies all your hopes, all your fears, and everything in between. Because after the loss of someone you've loved, it's not unusual to have dreams that your loved one is still here. And after someone's passed, it's very I think well known that you can have these experiences in your dreams where you get to communicate and you get to conversate and experience the love and the passion and the compassion that you have for that person. And they serve a very specific purpose in the healing process. I truly believe that. Regardless of the meaning of the dream, it helps you deal with the incomprehensible feelings that are still very much in your heart, and helps aid the grief process. The subconscious and unconscious mind cannot distinguish between wish and reality. I've talked about this before with you guys. And maybe you have been so aware of the pain and the emotion and the yearning and the desire that your brain's trying to logically make sense of it, and thus it can produce so many connections. And on a spiritual level, I do believe that we are influenced spiritually with our dreams. They shouldn't be taken lightly. There should be a sense of understanding that where this is coming from can help you heal and not be a prolonged, agonizing torture. I really think that if we understand where these are coming from, we definitely can understand that those dreams can provide information about what's really going on inside of us. They shouldn't be taken lightly. So if our dreams show us that our loved one is still very aware of us, we should take advantage of those situations and really write them down if you can remember them when you wake up. Even if a dream doesn't reflect your current situation with that loved one, it can definitely bring some emotional awareness that you may have been unaware of. When people dream of loved ones who've passed away, they often report feeling a very strong sense of peace afterward, like kind of a reassurance that are beyond kind of words. And some have pangs of pain, and I understand that. But you have to understand that they can live on. And I truly believe on a spiritual level, there's some lines for communication. There's some reassurance and some emotional support from seeing that person who's passed, that they're okay. Dreams offer us an opportunity to say goodbye and to utilize that time to conduct any business. I've had these dreams before, which is kind of intense, and maybe on a future episode we'll talk about those kind of things, because I really do think there's a lot of spirituality that goes along with these. I've noticed other attributes of this process are times where you might find fault, and it feels maybe at times as if you were at fault somehow, that you were there, you saw it all happening, you saw it unfolding, in your hindsight, in your mind's eye, right? So many things could have stood out that you would like to have done differently, but we cannot take on ourselves the blame, specifically when we only have one side of the stewardship, or even the knowledge of what's happened. But all events require you to figure out what's happened. It's why the human need of understanding who's at fault, who's right, who's wrong is so crucial. But I want you to know that it's not. For example, let's just say a tumor who could have been found earlier in someone that you love, and maybe if you would have been able to take them to the doctor earlier, or so on and so forth, you could have done something differently. I'm sorry, but you cannot spend too much time in that mindset. You're not responsible for these kind of situations, listeners. And what I mean by that is, this is kind of the penance process, where we feel as though we could have done something, and if we blame ourselves, it will somehow make sense, and we can kind of put it to rest, and then apologize in some strange way that we could have done, should have done, would have done more. I need you to know that bad things happen. Illness happens. Accidents happen. Unfortunately, overdose happens. Suicide happens. And we want to prevent them, obviously. But the truth is that life is risky and dangerous. And I think it would serve us well to understand that there are so many things out of our control that we do not have stewardship over. And it's funny, because we're the only species on Earth who really know as much as we know about fear, specifically when it comes to death and to passing on. And it can get us into these mindsets where we start feeling this personal responsibility, even if it's out of our control. And part of that terror comes from being bombarded with messages of fear from media, from others who don't understand, and really for others looking for someone to blame. And your sorrow that you experience, the loss of someone that you truly love, is absolutely inevitable and results from circumstances way beyond your control. And that is always hard to live with, I guarantee you. But in time, the hope is that you'll get to use a lot of the things that you've experienced and the understanding and the situational and emotional awareness to hopefully begin to see with effort that the results might still have been the same, even and or if. Think about that for a minute. The loss would still be there, even though you could have done more. You could have done your best. You could have, should have, would have. And blame is so futile because it does not accurately reflect the truth about what's happened. In time, you'll find the peace, and you'll remember that your role as a companion, as a caregiver, as a friend, as a family member, really puts you into the place that we have to always remember that death is inevitable. And in many cases, there's no one to blame. And that's hard. I understand that. It's always not as cut and dry as we want it to be. But there's this concept of survivor's guilt, and the concept of survivor's guilt became very widespread after World War II, where we saw people who had survived concentration camps and whatnot come out feeling as though they somehow should have, perished there with their friends or their colleagues or their companions. Why them and not me? And this phenomenon of survivor's guilt occurs when someone witnesses or experiences something very catastrophic, very, very catastrophic. And you've seen it in 9/11, you've seen it in car accidents and plane crashes, all kinds of things. We're seeing it now in COVID and all kinds of stuff. I need you to know that blame and guilt can be used like everything else to distract us from coping with pain and loss. And it's much easier to get involved in the ways that fits our own narratives than really what the facts truly are. And you're going to go through some self-examinations. I know you will. But as you do that, you'll find, I hope, even more exploration. And as deep as you want to go is not going to change what's happened unless you really, truly are to blame for any kind of gross negligence or crime, which I highly doubt in so many ways. Even with people that I've talked to that have sold the drug to the person that overdosed, they need to understand that that person would have gotten it from fill in the blank. And I think it's okay to take some emotional responsibility, but it is not okay to do it should have been me and not them. Along with those attributes comes that of resentment. And resentment is often, I think, a concern when there's a conflict of loss of a loved one, meaning, parents who might have mixed emotions about a child, or maybe, a situation where there was loss and then there was lies exposed and there were things that made you understand that your loved one wasn't perfect. And as we mourn for those that we love, we should always have a sense of understanding that they deserve, no matter the circumstance, a degree of forgiveness. And we mourn for those, who we care for and who cared about us. And when we find out things after the fact, it's very easy to try and block off those emotions and be upset. But that doesn't do anything for you. The situation and the circumstances remain the same. Resentment doesn't always, die with the death or the passing of a loved one. It can be a very common part of unfinished business that we get left with. And resentment is old anger. Think about that. Resentment is old anger that we've never dealt with or never had a chance to deal with because of whatever circumstance. And it can arise from situations that you may have thought were completely resolved. But really, I need you to understand, listeners, that applying some emotional intelligence and allowing yourself to feel the measure of the experience will also put into your mind's eye that holding those kind of resentments will get you nowhere. Now, I truly understand the significance behind some of these attributes, and there are beliefs that we want to, I think, also challenge at times. And grief is going to be played out in so many different variations for all of us. Many of us share certain common beliefs about what should have, could have, or will happen. And I want you to understand that keeping an open mind and challenging some of those beliefs about, people, places, things, will definitely help you process trauma when you get to a point where you can have a flexibility in some of the emotional, components that you'll have to balance. And what I mean by that is, if we get too stuck on our beliefs that, a drug addict's always a drug addict, or, the person who took their life is wrong, or all these things, we will totally, I think, miss an opportunity for understanding and for emotional healing. Now, what I've noticed is when this happens and we take these things so personal that we begin to isolate, and isolation after the passing is not a good thing. You're not alone. You may feel you're alone, but you're not. And I need you to understand that we have an amazing situation, especially on this team, where it's hard to be alone when we have a tragedy like this. And it's okay to understand and to allow people in, even if it hurts. Isolation is part of the grief process too. And it may serve as a little bit of a transition back into life, but ultimately isolation is darkness. And it's not a place I want any of us to be. So if it's time for us to move on beyond the isolation, if you're feeling like you've checked out or you feel like the passing of someone has kept you away, call a friend, call the athletes, call a coach, call some companionship, invest yourself, introduce yourself back into the activity so that your isolation doesn't become your way of being. One thing I've noticed too that goes along with isolation, especially when this happens, is that the secrets tend to plague us. We all have secrets. Some of them are big, some of them are insignificant, but regardless of the size, when we have secrets, specifically if a loved one passes on and secrets are revealed, we have to understand that after a loved one's died, it's not unusual to uncover secrets, here or there. The hardest part is that secrets represent something that we perceived them withholding from us, and we typically will take those things personally. And it may be very painful to find out that a loved one had maybe a gambling, habit, or had strayed from a marriage, or a secret that has, maybe tarnished maybe some of the final months or days of their life. Secrets can leave behind more than just bits of information. They often leave questions in their wake. Sometimes secrets are made known because of phone records or pictures or people even. But the truth is that we don't typically think about these kind of things because we are in such shock, and a tremendous shock arises when a secret is discovered. And sometimes you've got to take some time to deal with it. And it might even have to be dealt with separately from the grief process. In many ways, I think there are two ways that you can deal with these kind of shocks to the system with this, and the loss of a person that you've loved and reactions to the secret, I think often results in the secret being a component of grief, like the sadness and the anger and the resentment and the betrayal, that leaves us feeling as though we didn't truly know all there was about our loved one. Not all secrets are negative by nature. I think you should know that. Loved ones are shocked sometimes to find that, maybe they didn't realize their loved one had a secret passion or hobby. People are often find that, sometimes there are people that they didn't even know they would be associating with, they built friendships with. But if you try to keep the secret circumstances around the death, perhaps, it's going to cause a barrier between you and the people receiving the information that will probably limit the amount of support that you'll have for your loss. I think it's super important to understand that just as people have secrets in their life, they also have secrets in death and grieving. And sometimes it's difficult to see those situations, especially when your heart's been so hurt. So I think it's important to understand the principles behind there, because many people find compassion for their loved ones once they think about the tables being turned on their secrets. And I don't think that's always the case. I think that each person is going to be uniquely different, but to understand that secrets should be handled with care, but also with understanding. Sometimes we get in situations where we punish ourselves. What did you do so wrong that deserved this kind of punishment, right? I've heard this before. What did I do that would make this person do this or that? What did your loved one ever do to deserve that illness or that kind of death? The answer is nothing. We don't do anything to deserve anything, especially under this kind of premise. But it doesn't stop us from feeling as though we're being punished. And a lot of times we'll channel this anger towards deity or through God, through circumstances of that way. And we think, there's oftentimes I'll hear people specifically in addiction that will say, if I'd been a better person, maybe this wouldn't have happened, or those kind of situations. And that's not true. And I do not want you to get into that mindset. If I could have loved more, if I could have supported more, let's not punish ourselves that way, people. See, we live under the assumption that if we are just and we are doing what we do, we will not suffer. And we know that's not true. This life has a lot of suffering in it. But life, I guess we put it this way. If we have a life to live, we also have a death to experience. And to love is to ultimately lose what we have, I guess, established as the privilege of loving eventually, because none of us make it down here alive. So I think sometimes that memory of the emotions that we can kind of punish ourselves for may come through a form of religion, maybe believing that God's punished us for actions that have now consequences. But I have to remind you that that's not the case. In any situation, our transgressions may feel as though they have contributed somehow, but they do not. Okay, that is not how any of this works. It makes you sometimes question how an all-loving God would not bestow, some understanding on you when you're going through so much pain. And I'm saying, listen, just listen. Death may follow life, but punishment is not God's consequences. Is not God's consequence for loving and caring. I know that to be true, listeners. So please proceed with caution in that kind of a mindset. I know that there is a certain amount of control that we try to feel like we have or that we lose, and in situations where we have a loved one that's taken or who passes away, or maybe even illness, it often makes us feel desperately out of control. And that kind of pressure can easily turn us into control freaks for other situations and people in our lives, and be vigilant that doesn't happen to you. I see this frequently with the passing of a child, where the family will then, combine their resources and their emotion to the child who's still alive. And then that begins to limit their experiences in this life. We want to be careful with that, because we cannot control life like that. It doesn't work. Control is empty, and it sometimes is harsh, and it covers up the more I think vulnerable situations underneath, and gives us this illusion of safety, and it's not. It's truly not. And I think if we get typecast into that, we're living in a fantasy. And I think sometimes that fantasy can really put us into some very difficult situations and places. Finally, listeners, on this topic, I want to talk about strength. I want to talk about how much strength it takes to carry on. I want to talk about how much strength it takes to simply be strong. Those two little words you've heard before. Just be strong. And they're often declared to a lot of people who are experiencing grief. You know this, right? Just be strong. And men, you hear them more often than women. And so many times we hear surviving loved ones, being told, be strong for the sake of fill in the blank, the children, the family, the so on, the so forth. See, strength is kind of an interesting thing. We're told by people to be strong, and I think they have good intentions. I actually once heard this too in a situation where the loss of a loved one, it was explained to another individual that I was standing close to take it like a man. You got to be strong for your wife. You got to be stoic for your children. Be strong. We got to be careful with that, listeners. That kind of bravery belongs to heroes who need it to act in the face of danger, right? But bravery doesn't mean being an unfeeling individual, a cold and callous individual. Our society, I believe, has been very confused at keeping a stiff upper lip. The bottom line, listeners, is that strength can certainly be channeled into loss, but it can also violate it. Think about that for a moment. Why do we tell people to be strong? Maybe it's because they hear it in the movies. We hear it used in motivational speeches, on YouTube, those kind of things. It seems like it doesn't do any harm or cause any kind of interference in the grieving process. But then people are always more comfortable when they're grieving a person that doesn't give off a sense of he or she falling apart. So of course we'd feel like those words would be appropriate. If the grieving person doesn't cry or express too many emotions, we won't feel too much either, right? The truth is that pain can be contagious. You can be around someone who's in deep sadness and not feel it. So if we put a lid on the grieving person's emotions, we won't have to deal with them ourselves. But what's the cost of camouflaging your grief, right? When we shelf our pain, it doesn't go away. When we stuff it down, it festers in a bunch of different ways, right? It just festers. And when it festers, it creates deeper wounds, deeper senses of sadness. And I think that by not allowing ourselves to feel that way, we're doing them a huge injustice. We need to understand that strength and grief, they definitely can fit together. But we've got to understand that in order to be strong and to handle grief in the end, we have to, allow, grief to bring the strengths we didn't know we had. I think grief can create strength. I think strength and grief is a little bit out of tune. And I truly believe that strength and grief shows up in a lot of different ways. I think that it shows itself and presents itself very uniquely with different people. We need to be aware that grief hits all of its power in so many different ways that there's not a one-size-fits-all, solution to amplify it to some kind of process by which we can make it fast or make it better or make it easier. But I do know that when we are able to allow these things to happen in a natural way, with the support, with the understanding, with the compassion of others, we can share these feelings with people that we truly love and we trust and we allow in. It definitely can make things easier to handle. I truly believe that, listeners. So really, I think it boils down to so many attributes about what we experience inside. And I've had some of these experiences and these feelings this week, because when we lose someone and someone passes away, it gets us into a mindset of reflection. Just yesterday, on December 5th, it was a Sunday, the team gathered around athlete Carly's gravesite with Savannah Rich and Tyson Rich and the family and friends and teammates and the Hutchings family. And we were able to feel, and we were able to remember and laugh and to be present and to universally remember the people and the person that was Carly and that was Dawn. And in a lot of ways are Carly and are Dawn. Because when I use the term, listeners, lost, I'm using that so that you understand the flow of the discussion. I have a firm belief, I'll call it a testimony, that this isn't the end. That life goes on the other side of our mortal existence. And I know that to be true because of some of the experiences I felt, some of the things I've seen in my life, but more so with the subtlety of reminders, memories that come up, feelings that are reestablished, relationships that are similar. reminders on a spiritual level when you're tuned in. I do not believe that anyone is lost. And I know that for a lot of different reasons, and I know how hard it is at times, but I'm a firm believer that we will all be reunited one day. And whatever the circumstances are, if you're listening to this having lost a loved one, or heaven forbid, and it will happen, that we'll all have someone close to us that will pass on, I want you to remember some of the things we've talked about today and some of the things that will help us through the grieving process, but will not cure us through the grieving process. I never realized how important each of these relationships would be. And I wanted to do this podcast specifically for you, the listener, because chances are, if you are here because of a substance use issue, I will bet dollars to dimes that everyone listening to this has a loved one who struggles with addiction. And if you have a loved one that struggles with addiction, has a history of it, the potential for them being in a situation where overdose could occur is very high. A situation where accidental death is high. Even suicide is high. But it's up to us to remember the experiences that we have and the team and the support that we have, so that universal love can help us get through any of the darkest times that this addiction can throw at us. And I want to thank you for listening. More so, I want you to be aware that if you are struggling with addiction, if you are contemplating taking your own life, I would ask you desperately to reach out for help. You can do so by following Addict to Athlete's social media pages, by instant messaging any of our teammates. But more importantly, if you are not part of Addict to Athlete's page, or even if you are and you want a different resource, I would guide you to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. Again, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK, or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. Listeners, none of us can do this alone. Athletes, from Coach Blu, I love each one of you so much. The relationships we build on this team are real. It doesn't matter if you've drifted from the team, if life circumstances have taken you away. Once you're part of Team Addict to Athlete's family, you are always part of Team Addict to Athlete's family. No one is too far gone. As athlete Carly said, we can do hard things. And as athlete Don Hutchings said, runners, run with your heart.